Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Kathryn Ashton will defend the academic thesis Capturing and Measuring the Wider Health Impacts and Associated Social Value of Sustainable Investment in Public Health. May I invite you to present a summary of your studies and the conclusions of your thesis.
Okay. Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear Chair, dear esteemed members of the opposition, dear promoter, dear co-promoters, dear colleagues, family and friends. Today I will be presenting a summary of my PhD research entitled Capturing and Measuring the Wider Health Impacts and Associated Social Value of Sustainable Investment in Public Health. So just to start, I'm going to give a bit of background and global context to my research as outlined in Chapter 1 of the thesis. So there are rising health challenges due to preventable causes which have been impacted by climate change, COVID-19 and economic crises. This has led to increased health inequalities, burden of disease, strained systems and unmet health needs. This perma-crisis has highlighted the importance of links between health, the economy, the environment and also the importance of public health and health in all policies. There is also a growing movement to shift towards well-being economies, which place people and health and well-being in the environment at the heart of economic systems, moving away from traditional metrics such as GDP, gross domestic product. So it's known that public health and prevention can help to reduce disease burden, health inequities and long-term costs to not only the individual, but also the economy, the environment and society. However, how do we make that case for investment in public health and how do we demonstrate that wider impact and value that investments such as this can have? Traditional methods such as cost-effectiveness analysis, return on investment tend to focus more on financial metrics and that direct return and value for money. However, there are evolving perspectives to capture those wider holistic health impacts and that wider social value, so moving away from looking at things such as QALYs, but looking through the lens of the wider determinants of health to capture that wider impact. This can help to align public health investments with sustainable growth and also prioritise well-being and equity. So the main objective of my PhD research was to explore how the wider health impacts and associated social value of public health programmes can be captured, focusing on applying the frameworks of health impact assessment, HIA, and social return on investment, SROI. So within my thesis, there were three main objectives. Firstly, to identify and collate existing evidence on SROI and how it can be used in conjunction with HIA. Secondly, to capture Public Health Institute's perspectives of how these frameworks could be built into practice. And then thirdly, analyse how SROI can be progressed for use within the field of public health. So within the thesis, there are two main concepts which I focus on, the first being health impacts, the second social value. So by health impacts, I mean both those positive or negative impacts which result as a direct result of a policy, programme or intervention. And again, this takes this wider holistic lens. Social value then, I define as the change that stakeholders experience as a direct result of a policy, intervention or programme. Again, it looks through that wider societal lens. And the two frameworks I focus on within this thesis to then capture and measure these concepts are health impact assessment, HIA, and social return on investment, SROI. So health impact assessment is an internationally recognised process which seeks to identify the potential positive and negative impacts of a policy proposal or plan. Social return on investment then, SROI, is a social accounting methodology which seeks to not only identify those outcomes but also quantify them and monetise them. So the next few slides then will focus on the findings of my chapters of my thesis. So if we start with chapter 2, my research question was what is the existing evidence base demonstrating the social value of public health interventions across stages of the life course? And for this I undertook a scoping review of the academic and grey literature which identified 40 studies. And the majority of those studies actually focused on the childhood and adolescent life stage of the life course and mainly focused on those health promotion interventions. Now, this raised the applicability of SROI across the different realms of public health, for example, health protection, screening services. And there is also a notable lack of academic evidence, with only 3 out of the 40 studies being published within the academic literature. Chapter 3, then, I looked at how could established frameworks, such as HIA and SROI, complement each other? How could they be used together? So for this, I undertook a scoping review of the academic and grey literature, and also then carried out 9 semi-structured interviews with key stakeholders internationally. And from this, I found that there is limited existing evidence of using both frameworks simultaneously, and there's a definite need for further research in practice. The research identified several benefits of potentially using HIA and SROI together, the first being that they both take that same holistic lens of value and impact. They're both looking at it through that lens of the wider determinants of health. SROI has the benefit of being able to monetize those outcomes, whereas HIA has those validated tools and resources which can be used to help identify those impacts and outcomes. So I think from this research, it showed me that there's shared learning to be done with the 2 frameworks together. Challenges, however, were identified around communication and transparency when using the 2 frameworks simultaneously, and also not to lose that focus on health and equity when moving towards that monetization of outcomes. Chapter 4, then, I looked at how do public health institutes capture and measure their social value. And for this, I carried out an online international survey where 17 public health institutes internationally responded, and 9 of those representatives then agreed to follow up with a semi-structured interview. And results from these methods showed that awareness of SROI is high within those institutes, but then fewer than half of them actively measure their social value. And when I questioned why this was, several challenges were brought up, and these were identified as limited resources, expertise, but also political backing as well. And solutions to overcome these challenges were identified as policy initiatives, best practice networks, and case study sharing. Moving on to Chapter 5, then, I looked at how can the SROI framework be advanced to capture the social value of public health programmes, services and interventions. And for this, I undertook a scoping review of the academic and grey literature, which identified 53 studies, and then I carried out 9 semi-structured interviews with key academics working in the field. And this research showed that SROI is definitely a framework which can be used to identify the social value of public health interventions. However, there were key areas for improvement which needed further research. For example, the need for standardized application of the social value principles, the establishment of quality standards for SROI needs improvement, and also the promotion of transparency in reporting the findings from SROI studies, so not focusing solely on that ratio produced at the end, but actually on that wealth of information that's collected throughout the process. And then finally, in Chapter 6, I put what I learned into practice throughout the course of the research into a case study of actually doing a real-life application of HIA and SROI. And this was carried out on a self-administered service for sexually transmitted infections within an open prison setting in Wales. And as you can see from the figure on the right-hand side, from using HIA and SROI together, I was able to identify not only those monetarily returnable outcomes, so those outcomes which gave a direct financial saving for the NHS and the prison service, but I was also able to identify and provide valuations for those more intangible outcomes which give that illustrative value. For example, the improvements to mental health and well-being as a result of the intervention, and the value of being able to do a self-test themselves for the prisoners without having to be taken off-site to an external clinic to have the testing done. So the HIA process was able to identify those wide range of impacts, and then the SROI helped to quantify that social impact at the end and provide a ratio. Moving on to the discussion chapter then, Chapter 7, there were 3 main areas of interest in the discussion chapter. The first being conceptual considerations of using HIA and SROI together. So they're both distinct frameworks which can be used in isolation, However, I found from this research that there are key obvious benefits of using the two frameworks together. They both share that holistic definition of health. They both look through that wider lens to think about the wider determinants of health when looking to capture and measure value. And they also share some key common principles. For example, they both rely heavily on stakeholder engagement and involvement to understand the real change which is happening, could happen or has happened as a result of an intervention, an investment, a policy or programme. The second area of the discussion then focused on sustainable investment in public health towards a wellbeing economy. As I mentioned on my previous slide, a wellbeing economy is an economic system which places people and the environment at the heart of decision-making, alongside traditional economic metrics such as GDP. And I think this research has demonstrated the start of a process to using HIA and SROI to demonstrate which investments can give the most value back in terms of moving towards a wellbeing economy. And finally, future implementation and application of HIA and SROI in public health. Both frameworks being used together have potential for growth. This is not only with regards to the development of the tools, but also key to this is the development of mindsets and skill sets as well, to enable people to be able to not only use the tools, but understand the results that are being identified. And also a key area identified was around using policy levers and legislation also to help promote this. So as with all research, my research had key strengths and limitations. I'd say it's an innovative thesis looking to fill a unique research gap. I used both mixed methods, so both quantitative and qualitative, and carried out and used both primary and secondary evidence within the work, alongside a practical application through a case study. I do acknowledge, however, the case study was in a very, very niche setting with a small sample size. However, it did give us the opportunity to actually put the HIA and SROI into practice. And also I acknowledge that engagement with stakeholders, I only engage with certain subsets of stakeholders, and I acknowledge that there's other actors out there within this field which would be key to maybe engage with moving forward. So recommendations within the area of policy and legislation, I'd say this work has definitely demonstrated that alongside other elements, policy and legislation are key levers to help move this work forward. There needs to be a continued movement to provide levers to promote health in all policies, and to also help then promote initiatives at the local level. For example, the Sit to Slow movement, which is internationally working to slow down localities and invest in people's health and well-being and the environment, which then can move localities to become thriving economies. And I think frameworks such as HIA and SROI are key to being able to demonstrate and capture and measure the value of movements such as this. Within practice then, I think there's definite work around developing communities of practice. For example, bringing public health practitioners together with health economists to share learning, develop practices, develop case studies, and also promote strategic advocates as well, whether that be public health practitioners, health economists, or public health institutes themselves to help move this work forward. And then finally, within research, as identified in Chapter 2, there's a definite need for more academic case studies within HIA and SROI to help promote the validity of the methods and the frameworks for being able to capture and measure impacts and social value. And there's also methodological developments, particularly within the area of SROI, to help to do this as well. For example, the development of quality standards, specifically of using HIA and SROI together, and also the development of proxy value data banks as well, specifically for public health. And finally, as I alluded towards in my limitations, engagement with different actors would be really beneficial to this work. For example, policymakers and commissioners, to understand from their perspective what they would need to help demonstrate the case for investment in public health, or help persuade them to make more investments in public health. Impact then, I think this thesis definitely provides a platform for future work. It's definitely the start of a long journey to shift towards investment in prevention. I've presented this work at conferences both nationally within Wales and also internationally. I've co-authored a book chapter on the use of social value and social return on investment within health services evaluation, and I've also hosted network events and masterclasses to promote the findings of my thesis. My published papers have received citations in the academic literature, which shows there is a need and a want for research within this area. And also the work links with the work of the World Health Organization and the Wellbeing Economy movement moving forward at the moment. There is also a continued dedicated work programme within the World Health Organization Collaborating Centre for Investment in Health and Wellbeing at Public Health Wales, which is going to continue looking at how we can make the case for sustainable investment in public health moving forward. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation today. Diolch yn fawr, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We will now start with the opposition. And the opposition will be opened by the chair of the assessment committee, Professor Evers, Professor of Public Health Technology Assessment at Maastricht University.
Dear candidates, well, sorry, I don't speak Welsh. I always like it when somebody does that. But first and foremost, I would like to extend my congratulations. I really enjoyed reading your thesis. It's an interesting subject. You were not scared to dive into new roads. What I also liked is that you looked at the broader perspective. Something which I also do in my work, so I liked that you looked at the societal impact and the broader impact of that, and I really appreciate it. In addition to congratulating you, I would also congratulate your supervisory team online or here present, and I assume that a lot of people from the Welsh country are watching online, so also your family and friends. Of course, I'm not here only to give compliments, and I would like to have a critical dialogue on a part of your journey. And looking at my background, I'm especially interested in the social return on investments. And to begin, you made some beautiful propositions. I hope you have them with you. Could you read aloud proposition number 2, please? If you have them.
Yes, I've got them.
Okay.
So incorporating SROI into public health evaluations enhances the ability of institutes to showcase the societal and economic value of interventions, strengthening their case for sustained funding.
Well, thank you. And this is one of the things I'm struggling with as a health economist, that if you look at funding, you have to showcase what the worth is of a public health intervention. And you have dived into that with both techniques. And I was wondering a bit, looking at your chapter 5, where you looked at several SROIs. What do you think are the key challenges or the inconsistencies? Because one of the things I often notice if I talk to funding agencies, that they don't fully trust health economists. That also has to do that, you can do this in, let's say, half an hour and you get the results, but you can also do it in depth like you do and you also get a result. So what for you are the key challenges when doing a social return on investments?
Thank you for your kind words and question, highly esteemed opponent. Throughout this thesis, I have obviously observed many benefits of doing SROI, but also many challenges. And I think I hint towards that in chapter 5. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the key challenges with SROI is the subjectivity around the proxy evaluations. Obviously, one of the key benefits of SROI, it has that ability to look at those intangible outcomes, which aren't traditionally measured. But that, of course, does bring with it some subjectivity. And, well, how do you then apply these valuations to these intangible outcomes? But I think this is key around how the findings are reported and communicated, and maybe that's not done the best at the moment in SROI. I think we need to be clear on why we use those certain valuations on certain outcomes, ensure they're validated with those stakeholders who are experiencing that change to ensure that they are as accurate as they can be. And then when those findings are presented, always indicate that it's only an indication of the value that could be created. It's not given a definite, this is what is going to happen, or this is what has happened. So I think, for me, the valuation is definitely a key challenge. And as I've sort of hinted to then as well, I think a key challenge then is how the findings are reported and communicated and understood. And I think this is where I've found, particularly within Chapter 5 as well, is that a lot of the studies, because they're not published academically, they don't have certain standards in the way they're reported, and some just go straight in up front, report the ratio, and don't report the findings behind that ratio. So I think if I was a policymaker or commissioner, I don't know, you'd either be a bit wary about, how has this been created? Should I run away with it? Or some may just take that and run away with it and then maybe be disappointed.
So sorry to interrupt you a bit, because I only have I totally agree. The reporting, and especially the way you value proxy, which are not, let's say, the hard values, how to put a British pound or a Welsh pound or a euro on that's a difficult one. I also have the feeling that the how we do it is also something which is not really good standardized. And I also wonder, if I look at Chapter 6, which is also a kind of tempting example in open prisons to look at sexual transmitted infections. How did you deal with that yourself when going to Chapter 6? Because I assume you have a lot of details, so the reporting is okay, but the how did you decide, I'm going to do that? I assume you want to do it the best way possible, but how did you decide on that, and can we learn something from that for future SROIs?
Thank you for your question. I think, obviously, SROI is a flexible and pragmatic process, so there is that leeway within the process that as long as you follow the key steps in practice, you're doing an SROI. But I think from actually undertaking one in Chapter 6, it shows you can go down something, you can go in one direction really far, or you could just choose to just sort of tick that box and do that step and then move on to the next. So I think there's definitely challenges about doing it in practice, and how I made decisions along the way doing the SROI process myself. I think obviously I wanted to do it as academically rigorous as I wanted to because of my background, whereas I think, say, if you were from a different organisation, third sector, doing it because you wanted to prove the value of investing in your programme for funding reasons, you may take a different approach. And I think as this is something that needs to be looked at within further research within SROI, to think about how the process can be standardised a little bit more than what it is at the moment. Because I think if we go back to the oranges of SROI, it was developed within the third sector, not an academically rigorous process per se. So I think there is opportunities to develop that going forward.
Can I just, one small question, or do you want to?
Very short question.
The way how is then a bit of a question, because as an evaluator, you can very much steer the SROI. So maybe one sentence on the how we could do that. How we could standardize the way we use our methodologies, and that they're sound.
I think there could be clearer steps within the methods to be used, to be honest. I think ensuring that you're not only engaging with stakeholders, but also validating every step along the way with them. Okay. Because and not solely just relying on that qualitative data, but building in some more of that quantitative as well to make it more robust.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your answers and give the words back to the pro-rector.
Thank you, Professor Evers. The opposition will be continued by Professor Huber, Professor of Social Medicine, in particular infectious disease control at Maastricht University.
Thank you. Dear candidate, congratulations. It was a pleasure to read your thesis, and also I really liked your cover. It's also nice to mention that, of course. Also congratulations to the supervising team, well, partly at online. And also congratulations with the publications already from the empirical chapters. I learned a lot about because of your thesis, because I'm not someone that has expertise in health assessment or health economics, but I know something about public health, and so that was the focus from of the perspective from which I ask my questions. Well, you stated in your thesis, findings can be used by public health practitioners to inform resource allocation and better showcase their contributions to society, environment and economy. Well, I'm working at the university, of course, because that's why I'm sitting here, but I'm also working actually as a public health professional in the public health service, so the regional public health service or the institute that is actually financed and funded by the municipalities. And there's always quite some tension to negotiate sufficient funding. As you might imagine, every year we have to sit around the table, and of course we make our case and give arguments why public health is definitely in need of more money, or advocate investments and show them the social value and the benefits. Nevertheless, there is always a kind of balance, of course, where they come up with the argument that of course it's nice that we do something about the public health and do something for the civilians, but other parties are also gaining from that, like the insurance companies or workforce, etc. So what could you advise me on this when I talk with this, for instance, the mayors about this, and how could you help me with a good response, given, of course, your background of your thesis in perspective? So that's my first question.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. So the question is around how would I make the case, I guess, for this work to help you advocate to your colleagues around the table. I think it's not only about showcasing what I've found within this thesis, but it's tailoring it to their priorities and their needs. So, for example, it's not just about making the case for health and equity, but it's about making the case. So, for example, if you've got good, healthy people, you're going to have a good, healthy workforce, which would then improve economic stability. So it's thinking about those long-term investments. So not just promoting it as if we invest now, we'll get this direct return immediately. If we invest in this way, we'll have wider benefits, not only for those people, but also for the economy, for the society. We'll save costs in the long run if we invest in this way. So it's advocating for that shift to prevention and moving away from that reactive spending to more,
Yeah, but what, for instance, when we relate it to Chapter 6, then you can see it as within a prison. You can balance that out, and the benefits are also for the prison in that whole system. Of course, here we have a difficult or more challenging situation where this might be acting as a barrier when you see that there are gains, that the sort of financial gains are with the health insurances. So how do you deal with that? So it's not within the same system. And of course, you can advocate about the long-term gains, but politicians usually say only there has to be done something within my short range that I'm sitting here.
Yes, and I think that's the difference, I think, between the system in the Netherlands and the system in Wales. So obviously in Wales it's a tax-based system, so the messaging would be quite different, wouldn't it? In that I think we've got a more moral basis to prove that the investments are having that wider societal impact. But I think an insurance-based system, like you say, they are looking for those direct, immediate measures. So I think it's more of a hard sell, definitely, in insurance-based systems.
But could you make some arguments or some case?
It's a tricky one to answer, I think. I think I'm struggling. Can you?
Okay, now well, one of the things, of course, also municipalities have a role and a task by law even. We also have a public health law, and these are things that might give opportunities to talk about, and of course also content-wise, there's definitely some positivity in there to talk about the long-term effects of public health, but still it has some challenges. Maybe another question. What I always find a bit puzzling is when we look at the governmental investments we talk about health protection and health promotion, and they are quite diverse. I don't know what it's in Wales, but for instance in the Netherlands, I don't know the numbers exactly by heart, but it's about 10 billion what is spent on health protection and maybe only 1 billion for health promotion. Could you say something about how does that is that a good thing, or should we value that differently? How is that about social value of health protection and health promotion? Did you think about it, and maybe you have some thoughts about it?
Thank you for your question. I think within the field of SROI and social value, particularly through the research I've done in Chapter 2 and also looking at the evidence which is already out there, a lot of it does tend to be within that health promotion field as opposed to
that's what we saw in your chapter 2, that were the most...
The health protection field. And I think that's due to the nature of the outcomes of health promotion versus health protection. I think traditionally health protection interventions tend to have that more direct, immediate impact. So they have that direct return on investment in that case, whereas I think it's definitely harder within a health promotion field to show that wider value and make the case for investment. So I think that's why there's that split with the more money in health protection. I think as well within the field of public health, health protection is traditionally public health, isn't it? And it's over the past decades, it's moved more into the health promotion field as well. But I think tools such as HIA and SROI can help now demonstrate and take that forward in terms of actually, no, we don't just need the money in health protection. We need to start shifting towards prevention and promoting health, giving people the onus to make healthy choices so that they can go on to live longer, healthier lifestyles. And I think that using SROI can help determine that and help show and demonstrate the case as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Well, one of the other things is that, of course, as you mentioned also in your presentation, the perma crisis, the fact that we also have to prioritize maybe, or at least show something about the different topics that face us. So there are, of course, from conflict to economical crisis, mental health, infectious diseases, my field. And on one hand, you mentioned in the thesis, of course, it gives kind of momentum, but on the other hand, it also asks us to kind of weigh all these kind of different health impacts and assess or justify the amount of funding or money that goes to one of those health threats. How is it possible to, with your framework or to help prioritize these kind of funding opportunities?
I think it gives the opportunity to paint the picture, but it does in turn also create a more complex picture, I guess, which will make investment decisions harder if you're having to prioritize. But I think it's the start of a long journey. I think the work that I've done here will helps to show how frameworks such as HIA and SROI can be used to help make those decisions. But I think, it's going to create a complex picture. But I think if we weigh everything up together, not only using these methodologies, but also traditional health economics methodologies. I'm not putting them off the table, but it's how they can be used together to paint that bigger picture then for those decision makers, policy makers then to make decisions about investments.
Thank you for your questions and answers.
Thank you, Professor Huber. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Davies, Head of Health Economics, Advanced Analytics and Policy Modelling at the Welsh Government, and she's present online. Dr. Davies.
Thank you, Madam Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, congratulations on your thesis. It's demonstrated a clear breadth of academic skills. Your thesis was very well thought out and clear. I'd like to extend my congratulations to your co-supervisors and your supervisory team, again, on a very well executed piece of research. So thank you for that. I'd like to talk a little bit about the relative novelty, I think, of the methods within your thesis. And I think, as you've mentioned yourself, the need for growth, I think, within these methods. So when exploring HIA and SROI in public health, did you find continuity with regards to perhaps outcomes or approaches? I know you said that a lot of your research was quite concentrated in maybe childhood and adolescence. We've talked about obviously kind of health promotion and health protection, but I wonder what this continuity could mean for the application, I think, of your research, and also if there are any identified gaps that you have found.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. So I think, is your question around so continuity of the way the methods are applied or on the outcomes identified? Did I look at that at all? Is that?
Yes. Looking at kind of, are you seeing similar outcomes, across, as you say, the work that you've done? Again, are we looking at kind of approaches that all seem to be looking through the same perspective or the same lens? Yes, please.
So in chapter 2 in particular, I obviously did the scoping review of the academic and grey literature. I think in hindsight, my main aim of that review was to map out the existing evidence, but in hindsight, I think I should have taken that opportunity to do a bit more of a meta-analysis. So look at those, what were the most commonly used outcomes across the studies, map them out, what were the methods used within the SROI? Were similar methods being undertaken, or, were people doing it in a similar way? Because I think that could have been extremely useful in terms of doing future research, then looking at the development of the proxy data bank, looking at what outcomes were identified, and then looking at what were those common proxies as well, because I think that would have been a really valuable resource then to help others do SROIs themselves. So I think in terms of continuity of application, I think HIA has got more of a standing, so there's a lot more similarities within the different HIAs which have been undertaken, whereas I think, as was alluded to earlier, SROI is very, very different depending on who is doing the actual SROI research themselves. So I think moving forward, it would be useful to do a bit more of that work around the meta-analysis of what is already out there in terms to progress the methodology going forward. I think another one of the key findings that I think I reported in chapter 2 is that the environmental element of SROI is also missing. There's not that many environmental outcomes actually captured, so I'd be interested to take that forward as well with the future application of SROI and looking at why that is and how HIA can actually help SROI to do that through the use of some of the resources. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, is there any other gaps that you feel that have been identified through your thesis?
With regards to SROI specifically?
Yes.
So the gaps, I think they're around quality standards as well, potentially, because there are quality frameworks within SROI which are currently used, which I used within chapter 2 and chapter 5 of my thesis, which is the Kralev et al. But I think there's definitely work that could be used develop that going forward. I don't think all studies are using, all SROI studies use that to grade or have a quality score on their SROI studies, because at the moment it's quite subjective. It's yes or no. So, why have you done SROI? Have you justified it? Are you using quant or qual methods? Do you have a ratio? Have you got an impact map? It's not really digging any deeper into that. So I think there's an opportunity there to develop that going forward in future research as well.
Thank you. And I suppose you've discussed some limitations and challenges already during the course of this morning. I just wanted to ask, did your study go as expected? I think, were you expecting some of these challenges or some of these difficulties when you kind of went into your thesis and in your planning? And also, perhaps if you had the time to maybe start again, are there things that you would have done differently? And if so, what are these?
Thank you for your question, esteemed opponent. I think going into the thesis, I didn't know too much about social return on investment. I knew of it because of the work that was happening within the World Health Organization Collaborating Centre, which I worked in. But in terms of the detail around it, I was coming into it fresh. So I didn't know. HIA, however, I had more experience with. And that's why I could see the benefits of using the two frameworks together. So in terms of what I anticipated, I didn't know. I didn't know what was to come, but I think I've learnt a lot along the way, and particularly from putting that case study into practice. You only by doing it do you understand the challenges and maybe the areas for development when using frameworks such as SROI. So I think I've learned a lot from that, and I think if I did anything different, I've commented on chapter 2. I'd have done more of a meta-analysis on that opportunity when doing that scoping review. I think in hindsight as well meant when engaging with some of the key stakeholders, I could have delved a bit more into the details around the challenges and ways they thought things could be moved forward. And as I said in my presentation, I think it was a missed opportunity not to try and engage with policymakers and commissioners, because without their understanding their views and input into the work, it's making it even harder to progress it. I think we need to understand what they need and what they want in terms of moving this work forward. So I think if I could do it again, I'd definitely make the space for engagement with those stakeholders.
Thank you. One final question, as long as there's time, Madam Pro-Rector. How did you evaluate the quality of your research?
So the quality of the thesis as a whole, or you
can tell me a bit about both. Obviously, you have your separate components, but I think we've spoken a lot about using, these methods and how we take this forward. So I think, an element of that I think would be helpful as well, please. The
quality of my overall thesis, then, I think throughout the process, I reflected and also took time to share the work with key stakeholders in the field to ensure, that it was meeting the right requirements and the quality that it needed to make the case and to be able to make the recommendations. I think also, by the way the thesis works with ensuring the chapters were published within the academic literature, ensured that I was giving a quality argument for my findings and for my recommendations going forward.
Thank you. Would you mind if I just very briefly touched on, again, so taking this forward, I think you mentioned about, using kind of certain standards. I think, with other esteemed members of the opposition talking about, kind of taking these methods forward. So could you just very briefly say how you would maybe think about improving quality of, as you say, merging kind of HIA and SRI together for the future? So what learning would you maybe take forward following your thesis?
Could you give a very short answer?
Yes.
To the question?
I think the learning to take forward is that I think from using HIA and SROI together, they need their own quality standards alone. So I think from doing the practical application in particular, it's again finding out those nuances of using the two methods together, the transparency and the communication of doing them together. I think there's a definite need for ensuring that quality, like you say, and I think a framework needs to be put in place in order to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davies. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Zietz, assistant professor at the Department of International Health at Maastricht University, and he's present online.
Thank you very much for the floor, Madam Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, let me start by congratulating you on this fascinating thesis. I read it with great interest and learned very much from your work. I would also like to extend my congratulations to your promotion team, but I would also like to ask you some questions to gain a deeper insight into the cross-country comparability of your findings, their generalizability, and, if there's time, some of the implications for decision-making. Let's start with Chapter 4. In Chapter 4, you included participants from different countries and even different continents. How did you control for differences in national health policy and context when interpreting the results? And did you notice any differences in the responses between the countries or continents?
Thank you for your kind words, esteemed opponent, and for your question. So yes, Chapter 4 is where I undertook the online survey with the public health institutes internationally. I think in terms of cross-country application, because it was a scoping survey and the sample size wasn't massive, we were unable to do any cross-country comparison within the survey. Obviously, if we could go out again and do it and get a bigger sample size, I'd be really interested in doing some of that cross-country analysis because, as was talked about earlier, it would be interesting to see the differences between those systems which are tax-based, which systems are insurance-based, to understand the current perspectives and the way different institutes are looking at social value and whether there's a want to do it within systems compared to other systems. And also look at the difference between, because we included both national and regional public health institutes within the survey. Unfortunately, we only got 2 regional responses, the rest were national. But I think, again, if there was a big sample size, it'd be interesting to look at the differences there between the centralised and the decentralised systems as well. So I think there's lots of areas for future research if we could get a bigger sample size. But I think for the purpose of what I was trying to achieve through this initial scoping survey, it did what I was aiming to do with it. But I don't think there's a definite area for future work going forward with this.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's turn to Chapter 6 now. Here you demonstrated the combined evaluation framework, that it can function in practice as well. However, the prison environment struck me as a quite unique context for public health. Does using this case study have limited the generalizability of the findings of your research and putting them into practice to other public health settings? And how would you find the generalizability of your framework in terms of also using it in other countries?
Thank you, esteemed opponent. I think the reason why it was done in that setting is due to it was one of the only interventions basically that we had the opportunity to run the pilot on. I mean, we were lucky enough to have that intervention wanting to do it, so I was very grateful for that. But yes, I do acknowledge it was a very, very niche setting with a very small sample size, and it was actually very, very challenging, particularly around ethical procedures, to actually get to engage with the main stakeholder group. So yes, I acknowledge that it was done in a niche setting, and that the findings themselves of the SROI and HIA, so the ratio, is unique to that context. I acknowledge that, but the methods, I think, are the bit that are transferable to other settings. So from that pilot, we did prove that HIA and SROI can be used together. We identified some challenges and some solutions for using them together, and I think those findings would be then transferable to using it in different settings. Obviously, there is a need for further case studies, taking it out of the prison setting, maybe into those wider health promotion intervention settings where stakeholders are easier to engage with, a wider range of stakeholders potentially, because although we identified some stakeholders within the SRI and HIA process, we couldn't actually engage with them, so we had to exclude them from the analysis. So I think there's definite benefits of moving it into a wider intervention setting where things are more accessible and easy to undertake. But I think for the purpose of this research, it proved an opportunity to use the two together. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And for my final question, I hope there's sufficient time to address it as well. There's been already during the course of the opposition some discussion on how to support decision-making with the methodologies that you're developing. I would like to draw attention to some of the current discussions at the level of the EU to prioritize defense spending. And perhaps this would come at the cost of spending in health and social welfare. Now, considering the enduring differences between health systems across EU member states, can your combined approach help us make the case for continued investing in health at the EU level or across the EU?
Thank you for your question. So in terms of using the two frameworks to make the case for investment across the different systems in the EU, I think, yes, as a methodological framework, it can. As I've said, the frameworks themselves are flexible, scalable, pragmatic. So in principle, the frameworks could be used by anyone, but obviously they will need tailoring to the local context in terms of how they are used and how the results are presented and used by those you're presenting it to. So I think it is applicable across the different systems, but just depending on the local context in terms of how it's used in practice.
Mm-hmm. And just to make a stronger case for prioritizing health or protecting the prioritization of health and social welfare spending vis-a-vis defense spending, is there a specific, for example, health policy area or problem that you feel would be a good showcase to perhaps target with an EU-wide HIA SROI study to show that this is really crucial to continue investing in as we discuss, raising defense spending to 5% GDP across the member states?
In terms of a specific health policy area, I think it definitely lends itself more to those health promotion fields. But I think one thing that hasn't come up so far today is that SRI at the moment tends to be focused on that intervention level, so not really at that policy level. HIA has definitely got more practice within looking at impacts of a policy, but I think with regards to SROI, looking at the policy level type interventions, there's definitely more work that needs to be done, and the method needs to be evolved because there are more nuances with the valuation techniques, and I think with establishing the impact as well, it's harder at that policy level to attribute all of that impact to a certain policy, whereas at the intervention level, obviously that's easier. So I think there's definitely things that would need to be worked through with the methodology within SROI to take it to that health policy level. So I think it's hard to pinpoint a particular policy when I don't think the method's quite there yet. But in terms of intervention level, I think definitely health promotion interventions are more likely to be evaluated and looked at through these methodologies.
Okay, thank you very much for engaging with these questions. I return the word to the Pro-Rector. Thank you.
Good, Dr. Zic. We come to the last opponent. It's Professor Szabanowska, Professor of Public Health Leadership and Workforce Development at Maastricht University.
Thank you, dear Prorector. I would like to congratulate for this great work, and the congratulations are to you and to the promotion team. I took a great pleasure reading your thesis, which really resonates with a lot of aspects of public health. And I have several questions, but let me start with the first one that relates to one of the propositions. It is Proposition 7 by Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the WHO. Can you please read the proposition?
We don't just need more investment in public health, we must also rethink how we value health.
Yes. And while on one hand we see that we don't need the investment and we should look at the way of valuing health, we also know, and that has been already stated several times, that the amount of money, if we look at the indicators of public health, we can't find them. There is prevention. It is like 3 or 4% spent on health. And as you also rightly said, if there is a shift of funding towards prevention, we could save a lot of even lives and money that is spent on curative care. So how will you defend the statement of Dr. Tedros?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for your question. So I think I chose the statement of Dr. Tedros because I think it's not just about making the case for investment in public health, but it's also changing people's mindsets on how they view health and how health is valued. It relates to one of the other of my propositions that the first wealth is health. So it's about enabling people to understand that health isn't just about improving situations so that we have more money eventually by creating a more economic, sustainable economy. I think it's also about health, well-being and equity. So ensuring people have the opportunity to live healthy lifestyles, but also that we value that and we value the investments of that. So I think it's not just bringing it all back to money, but thinking about how we, a little bit like the Sit to Slow movement that I referred to, it's about how we put health and well-being and the environment at the heart of decision-making. So in turn, then that creates healthier economies and healthier communities.
Thank you for your answer. And you talk about the change of the mindset. And earlier you also mentioned that we need to invest in training new skill sets in public health workforce.
Yeah.
And public health is art and science, science and practice. So what would be, according to you and based on your research, the most required competencies that can be trained for among public health professionals on different levels? How would you formulate those that they can really be effective, or that they will effectively address the challenges related to investment on health?
I think within the public health workforce specifically, we're already thinking through that wider lens, through the wider determinants of health. So I think we've got that already. I think it's more encouraging and challenging people to then prove that wider impact and value. And I think that's moving away from traditional public health economics. It's looking with that new lens at being able to value those intangible outcomes.
We are educators also, and we train professionals. So how would you formulate, in a nutshell, the skills and knowledge that should be included in the curriculum? That we really train people with this mindset and this type of skill. Can you give an example?
I think to be able to undertake the frameworks then? Is that what competencies would you need? I think there's the obvious competencies around both quantitative and qualitative research methods, engagement with key stakeholders, but I think these are skills that the public health workforce already have. I think there's a definite need for that wider promotion of the health economics element of it alongside evaluation to help promote that thinking beyond just doing your theories of change and your impact mapping. It's more about taking it that one step further and trying to put it into a language which funders and commissioners and policymakers will understand. So I think maybe that could be developed going forward, and encouraging shared learning and engagement across disciplines as well, to help promote that. And learning by doing, I think, is key to that.
Thank you very much. And I see this project as a leadership approach. And in your main goal, you state that you would like to explore how the wider health impacts can be measured. But I would like to go one step further and ask how public health leaders and public health decision makers can advance or can leverage the knowledge on these measurements to improve health of the populations, that there is really the results of your research can be given to the stakeholders, and that they can say, now we know what to do. So what are the aspects that can be taken by public health leaders to advance the knowledge?
I think the aspects that can be taken forward.
Do you want to answer, or are you?
I'll finish that.
Okay. Kathryn Ashton, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Thank you.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Your mind, years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time, cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Kathryn Ashton, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Dr. Clemens is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor. Please all rise.
Dear Kathryn, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformance with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Kathryn Ashton, the degree of doctor and grant you all the rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Dear Dr. Ashton, dear Kath, it has been a great pleasure to accompany you throughout your PhD expedition to pioneer the concept of social return of investment for investment into public health, discovering how wider health impacts can be captured and measured. And you ensured this to be an academically interesting, thorough and rich journey, which culminated in the doctorate today. Reflecting on your work and our collaboration, I was screening our first email exchanges together with Peter Schroeder back in 2019, where we started to discuss delineation of the topic. I read back between very polished emails in English language, exchanging with you, Peter, and very short exchanges in between I had with Peter in German, obviously. Peter and I were quite impressed by the clear initial plan you exchanged with us back then. However, it took us more than a year to, in fact, get officially started. We had some staff changes over here. Peter left, unfortunately. Helmut took over. You had given birth to your second child. So we started officially in autumn 2020. And since then, the PhD was moving fast like a train, I would say, which resulted in the great achievement today. I've observing clearly three characteristics that brought you to this great achievement today. I think your passion for the field, your determination to make it really happen, and your professionalism. You were very clear from the start about your desire to explore the concept of social return of investment and make it accessible and workable for the public health community. Your genuine enthusiasm and curiosity for SROI has led you building and expanding your knowledge and expertise, which created trust around your work within your institute in Wales, but as well in the wider academic community. The initial studies had given you yourself confidence for the final study conducting an SRI on sexual health testing in the prison setting, where basically you practice what you had preached before. You had from the very beginning a grand plan for the PhD research in your mind. Your book, we all hold in our hand today, is in its basic structure not very different from the initial research plan we developed 2019. You seem to simply continue on executing sub-study by sub-study, paper by paper. I felt there was finally a sort of practice that you shared initially in an extended overall plan, followed by a more methodological description for data collection analysis, then followed by a presentation and discussion on initial results, and a first draft for review finally. Moreover, I really enjoyed your concise way of writing, getting soon to what is relevant and what matters in your view. This is, however, coupled with much attention to detail in your data collection and analysis to make sure there's accuracy and reliability in your findings and linked recommendations. Your professionalism. There's one characteristic I really learned to value very much in the professional exchanges we had. The German word unaufgeregt came to my obviously German mind first. There seems to be not a good exact translation, but it may be best described in English as calm, unagitated, and relaxed. Trying to find words to describe your working attitude, in this, I was reminded by a description of a good practice or research mind in conducting laboratory experiments, certainly not your field. I quote, "The mind should be at peace. Every aspect should be planned out, so you can cruise your experiment without distractions. Stress and anxiety don't help. So trust in your experimental design, relax, and focus on the order and timing of each task in the experiment." I think that's how I feel about how this has, the PhD has evolved. With the practice described before, step by step, you approached your research work. You seemed always well prepared. There seems to me not too many question marks or possible sidetracks. Our interactions were focused on how to make the planned analysis to be executed, to provide answer to the overall question you were really curious to find answers for. Dear Kath, I'm sure I'm glorifying today your PhD journey, knowing for sure there have been setbacks, challenges, combining work, the PhD, and a family with small kids during COVID times, most of the time. Forgive me for that, for the day today. Dear Kath, I'm very proud of you and your work as your supervisor and promoter. On behalf of the supervisory team, Mariana and Helmut, I would like to congratulate you, not only you yourself, but as it is good custom in the Netherlands, as well your family and friends who supported you throughout this journey. I hope we will continue our academic collaboration and that is not the end of our journey together. My congratulations.
Dear Dr. Ashton, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have obtained. I understand it's your first visit to Maastricht University, and that must have been quite an experience to be in an unfamiliar environment in combination with a PhD defense, but you've shown you stood your ground and you defended your thesis very well. The committee agreed on that. We also appreciate that you came to Maastricht University for this defense, because it's always nicer to have people live on stage defending their thesis than online. Nevertheless, for the people who are online, thank you very much for your contribution to this PhD ceremony. We really appreciate the time you have invested in being here online, and also in the committee members that are here. Thank you very much for being here. Well, we have come to the end of this PhD defense, and I close this academic ceremony.
Thank you.
Please all rise. May I invite you all to come forward so we can make a picture with those.
Do you need a certificate?
diploma, yes, please.
And you can stand here in front.